aloha, and welcome back to the Real Trash Podcast, where we talk about trashy subjects from politics. The main goal on this podcast is we talk about disabilities and the trashiness of people that want to take advantage of our community, and it's not okay. So this is why I discovered this podcast, and I welcome everybody to this podcast. And we talk about politics, we talk about trashy politics, uh, trashy. Oh my goodness, just forgot the word. Trashy, um, famous celebrity news, and then trashy, and then just talking about normal in my life and what is going on in my life. And so I'm so excited that we get to be on another podcast together. And yeah, I'm so excited, and lots of things going on. So I did haven't when I get on a podcast, I'm so excited that I'm able to get on it, and been so busy. So now I get to be on it again. And right now we are talking about Nazism. And so we are number three. And you know that the past two episodes we've been reading the book, and I am so excited to read it with you guys because there this stuff, I don't know why, excuse me. I don't know why that people don't think this is actually real or that this actually happened. Um, but it does. It does. It happened before, and it's still happening now. And so we get to dig into the people that actually started all of this and killed about 6 million Jews, and they were imprisoned, and they were viewed by a psychiatrist. So he got an insight. And so I hope that I can give the knowledge of people when we do talk to people, or we do see people that seem very Nazism, that we know and we understand that this still does take place, and that we don't need to be around this. We need to be around better people that don't surround this stuff. So here we are. We're in another. We're on page 29 of 430 pages. Keto. Spear remarks were directed mostly against bombastic Goring, but they also included the weak-kneed chief representative of persuasion militarism in the jail, Field Marshal Wilhelm Kittel. Though bred to the Parisian military tradition, Keto's behavior was almost obsequious when interviewed in his cell. The chief of the staff of its high command of the German Wehrmacht that had overrun most of Europe and had required a world coalition to be bowed and scraped before any lieutenant who came to see him, and explained what an unimportant little man he really was. Shorn of his shorn of his military insignia, he still looked very much like a persuasion officer of the old school, but without his rank and power, he had no more backbone than a jellyfish. The idea that a field marshal executed was apparently something that had never dawned on him. These attitudes were reflected in some of our early interviews. October 26th, Keto South. I asked Keto about his reaction to the indictment. Now that he had an opportunity to study it, he had underlined the statement in the indictment that holds all the members of the conspiracy responsible for the acts of each, and rules out following orders as an excuse. How in heaven's name can they accuse me of conspiring to wage aggressive war when I was nothing but the mouth the mouthpiece to carry out the Führer's wishes? As chief of staff, I had no authority whatever, no command functions, nothing. All I could do was to transmit his orders to the staff and see that they were carried out. I had no idea of his general plan, and he had made it clear that I was to stick strictly to military business. I see now that he probably made all his ministers and chief of staff mind their own business, so that no one had any clear idea of what his plans were. I can understand lots of things now that I was too stupid to understand then. The question of a new commander in chief of the armed forces in 1940, for instance, when General von Blumberg disgraced himself with that affair. Please spare me a re- repetition of the details. Hitler asked me to recommend a successor. I suggested Goring, but he had said Goring wasn't suited for the command. Then he decided to take it over himself. I couldn't understand why at the time because I thought he had enough to do with affairs of state. But now I realize that he had plans of his own and didn't want to confide in anyone else. The charges in the indictment are terrible and believe we're developing. But what could I do? There were only three possibilities: refusal to follow orders, which naturally meant death, resign my post, or commit suicide. I wasn't on the point of resigning my point 3 times, but Hitler made it clear that he considered resignation in time of war the same as desertion. What could I do? As for the persecution of the Jews, all I could do was defend the army against anti Semitic measures. When the Nuremberg laws began to dispose and disfranchise Nuremberg laws, began to qualify decorated World War veterans. Wait, disfranchise Jews. I prevailed upon the Führer not to discharge and disqualify decorated World War veterans. For the sake of army morale, he agreed. But outside of the army, it was clearly none of my business. To be sure, I heard later that even decorated World War veterans were being abused. But what could I do? November Keto sound. Keto said he was fit as a fiddle this morning. Keto said he was fit as a fiddle this morning. Before taking the IQ test, he cleared the table, neatly rearranged his cell, and made some remarks about his interrogation he had just had. That was a silly hypothesis they put to me. Would you have objected at that meeting of the general staff if you had known that it meant war? Of course, there was no such thing as objecting. How can an officer object? Naturally, had to say no to that question. An officer can't stand up right up before the Führer, his commander in chief, and object. We can only receive orders and obey. Well, I know that this doesn't interest you because you're not assigned to the interrogation, but I thought it would interest your psychologically psychologically. It, it's hard for Americans to understand the persuasion code of discipline. After he signified that he was ready, we proceeded with the test. He was cooperative and very responsive to assurance that he was doing well. On performance tests, he went about the task in a business-like manner. On the block design test, for example, he kept the used cars in a neat pile to one side, removed the blocks from the working space after each item, and cleaned the decks for the next one. He became increasingly impressed with the objectivity of the test and remarked how much better it was than the silly nonsense the German psychologists resorted to in the Wehrmacht testing station. Why they even flunked my son on an officer's candidate examination because of some stupid business in a dark room and an exercise to make a speech. where his voice wasn't loud enough for the audience. That wasn't there. I just kicked that stuff out. After the test, he returned to the subject of officers in politics. In my opinion, the naval officers are much smarter politically than army officers because they travel a lot. They began in England, Valparaiso, etc., and they get to know foreign temperaments while we don't. It was a big mistake on our part that our army officers were restricted to the narrow army life on home territory. GODL, says Joel. What is Joel? Even more persuading in his bearing than Keto was the Bavarian General Jodl. He was very stiff and uncommunicative at first, but the need to express himself on the indictment soon asserted itself. November 1st, Jodl's cell. The indictment knocked me on the head. First of all, I had no idea at all about 90% of the accusations in it. The crimes are horrible beyond belief, if they are true. Secondly, I don't see how they can fail to recognize a soldier's obligation to obey orders. That's the code I've lived by all my life. Thirdly, the guilt for atrocities in the East is suddenly reversed. How can the Russians sit in judgment on us for barbaric measures against Eastern populations? And then it says we enrich ourselves by looting our victims. Now that really floors me. Accuse me of giving the orders for the campaign against Holland, Belgium, Norway, Poland, if you will, but not don't accuse me of profiting one nickel's worth from any of the actions. In fact, I was amazed when I used to hear how the party officials were enriching themselves by exploiting our victories to their own advantage. I was a general first and last. When the conversation turned to the subject of atrocities, he threw up his hand. These horrible things, they're utterly incomprehensible to me. It's impossible for me to understand what kind of beast could have been in charge of those camps and could actually have done those things. Germans, of course, obeying orders, no doubt, I suggested. Germans, yes. But tell me, man to man, did you ever know the Germans to be bloodthirsty and brutal? I can't understand that. That's not a German characteristic. That's an aesthetic characteristic. The German people put up with active anti Semitism like the Nuremberg Law and Schirmer, I remarked. I assure you that not a soul dreamed that any such measures were intended, and many people were nauseated by the pornographic yellow journalist scripture. As you know, Goring finally had him put on ice. No, the only thing that the people normally fell for was the identification of jewelry with communism, which had a partially true basis in our revolution of 1918. But who could have dreamed of such consequences? It's absolutely horrible. Von Papen. Von Papen was the soul of politeness and courtesy, except when some slight irritation revealed the irritability of his 70 years. In our interviews, he revealed that he knew perfectly well that Hitler was a liar and betrayer. He could never quite adequately explain why he kept working in the Hitler government, however. October 30th, von Pappen's cell. After his test, we discussed Hitler. He was a pathological liar. That is obvious, said Papen. I can't figure him out exactly. I think he wanted the best for Germany in the beginning, but he became an unreasoning evil force with the flattery of his followers Himmler, Göring, Ribbentrop, etc. I tried to persuade him that he was wrong in his anti-Jewish policies many a time. He seemed to listen at first, but later on I had no influence on him. He went on to describe how he had prevailed on Hitler to veto the Goebbels boycott of the Salzburg Festival during his 4 years in Austria. 1934 to 1938. Gauss wanted the festival boycotted because of the Jewish director Reinhard. Returning to his own role in Nazi politics, he stated, "Of course, I knew that Hitler was guilty of bad faith in breaking the Munich Pact, but what could I do? Leave the country? I, the Munich, oh, I thought I might do some good by staying. I have been portrayed as an intruding devil, as in the book, Devil in the Top Hat. But I can prove that I have always worked for peace. I am confident in American justice and glad to have the truth brought to light through the trial. It's not so important what they do to me. I'm at the end of my life, but this court has a higher mission to establish international justice." The psychological test. The psychological testing program was virtually completed before the beginning of the trial, while the prisoners were still in solidarity confinement, so that the validity of the results was safeguarded. Of the various tests given, intelligence tests, Rorschach and thematic participation personality test. The simplest described briefly throughout, not the most significant, was the intelligence test. I used my own German version of American Wechsler Bellevue Adult Intelligence Test, and limiting and compensating for those parts which are subject to cultural differences like vocabulary and general information. The test battery consisted of a verbal test of memory and use of conception. 1. Memory span for number series of increasing length. 2. Simple arithmetic of increasing difficulty. 3. Common sense questions. 4. Concept formation by verbal similarity. B. Performances test of observation and sensory motor coordination. 5. Substitution code test, substituting digits for symbols. 6. Object assembled like jigsaw puzzle. 7. Converting designs on colored block. 8. Recognizing missing parts of pictures. These tests have been well standardized for adults, giving a good sampling of ability ordinarily associated with academic intelligence. The IQs were calculated according to the Wechsler-Bellevue method, which, unlike the Stanford Binet, makes allowance for the deterioration of average intelligence with old age rather than assuming a constant level throughout adulthood. This gave a fairer comparison of the IQ among such widely divergent ages. It should be borne in mind, however, that the effective intelligence of older men like von Papen, Scotch, and Strichter was 15 to 20 points lower than the IQ indicated here, but their relative standings in their respective age group is accurately indicated. So here's their IQ. Homer's Squatch was 143, Seth's Import was 141, Herman Gorham was 138, Carl Johnson's was 138, Franz von Papen was 134, Iris Radich was 134, Dr. Hans Franks was 130, Hans Franks was 130, Bon von Squatch was 130, Jacques Joshua von Ribbentrop was 129, William Kittle was 129, Albert Speer was 128, Albert Jody was 127, Albert Ronsberg was 127, Konstantin von Neurath was 125, Walter Bunk was 124, William Frick was 124, Rudolf Hess was estimated 120, Fritz Skotko was 118, Ernest Kaltenbrunner was 113, and Julius Stritch was 106, on basis of retest after recovery. Except for Stritch, the IQ showed that the Nazi leaders were above average intelligent, 90 to 110, merely confirming the fact that the most successful men in any sphere of human activity, whether it is in politics, industry, militarism, or crime, are apart apt to be above average intelligence. It must be borne in mind that the IQ indicates nothing but the mechanical efficiency of the mind. It has nothing to do with character or moral, nor the various other considerations that go into an evaluation of personality. Above all, the individual's sense of values and expression of his basic motivation are the things that truly reveal his character. The projective test, like the Inkbot test, gave some clues as to reaction pattern, but as a real study of character and personality, requires prolonged close observation to reflect these values and motives. However, a social movement as far reaching and catastrophic as that of Nazism cannot be adequately analyzed and understood merely in terms of the individual character traits of its leaders. A realistic psychological approach requires an insight into the total personality and interaction in their social and historical setting. The Mille Montreal afforded an ideal opportunity for such a study. The day-to-day record of conversations and reactions of the Nazi leaders during the year in which their past record was legally on trial and their whole system of values was psychologically on trial before the world, proved to be more revealing than the sum of all the tests could possibly be. We therefore turn to the combined historical and psychological record which constitute the diary. Appendix A. Statements of individual responsibility for crimes set out in count 1, 2, 3, and 4. Woo, we're getting into some deep stuff now. Statement of individual. Oh, okay. Appendix A. Statement of individuals individual responsibility for crimes set out in count 1, 2, 3, and 4. The statement hereafter set forth following the name of each individual defendant constitute matters upon which the prosecution will rely inter as establishing the individual responsibility of the defendant. Goring. Defendant Goring, between 1932 and 1945, was a member of the Nazi Party, supreme leader of the SA, a member and president of the Russian Minister of the Interior Persuasion, chief of Persuasion Police, and Persuasion Secret State Police, chief of Persuasion State Council, trustee of the 4-year plan, Rich Minister for Air Commander-in-Chief of the Air Force, President of the Council Minister for the Defense of Rich Member of the Secret Cabinet Council, Head of the Hermann Göring Industry Combined, and successor designate to Hitler. The defendant Göring used the foregoing position, his personal influence, and his intimate connection with the Führer in such a manner that he promoted the accession to power of Nazi conspirations and consolidation of their control over Germany set forth in count 1 of the indictment. He promoted the military and economic preparation for war set forth in count 1 of the indictment. He participated in planning and preparation of the Nazi conspirators for war of aggression war in violation of international treaties, agreements, and assertions set forth in counts 1, 2 of the 3 indictments. And he authorized, directed, and participated in the war crimes set forth in count 3 of the indictment, and the crimes against humanity set forth in count 4 of the indictment, including a wide variety of crimes against person and property. Ribbentrop. Defendant Ribbentrop, between 1932 and 1945, was a member of the Nazi Party, a member of the Nazi Richtenstadt, advisor to Ferd on matters of foreign policy, representative of the Nazi Party for matters of foreign policy, special German delegate for disarmament questions, ambassador extraordinary and special German delegate for disarmament questions, ambassador extraordinary, ambassador in London, organizer and director of Distilled Ribbentrop Rich, Minister for Foreign Affairs, members of the Street Cabinet, council member of the Minister for Political Staff at General Headquarters and General in the SS. The defendant Ribbentrop used the foreign positions, his personal influence, and his intimate connection with Führer in such a manner that he promoted the accession to power of the Nazi conspiration as set forth in count 1 of the indictment. He promoted the preparation for war set forth in count 1 of the indictment. He participated in the political planning and preparation of the Nazi conspiracy for wars of aggression and wars in violation of international treaties, agreements, and assurance as set forth in counts 1 and 2 of the indictment in accordance with the Führer principle. He executed and assumed responsibility for the execution of the foreign policy plans of the Nazi conspirators set forth in count 1 of the indictment. And he authorized, directed, and participated in the war crimes set forth in count 3 of the indictment and crimes against humanity set forth in the count 4 of the indictment, including more particularly the crimes against person and property in occupied territories. Hess. The defendant Hess, between 1921 and 1941, was a member of the Nazi Party, deputy to the Führer Rich Minister without portfolio, member of the Russian member of the Council Minister for the Defense of Rich, member of the Secret Cabinet Council, successor designate to the Führer after the defendant Göring, a general in the SS and the general in the SA. The defendant has used the foregoing position, his personal influence, and an intimate connection with the Führer in such a manner that he promoted the accession to power of the Nazis, conspirator, and the consolidation of their control over Germany set forth in count 1 of the indictment. He promoted the military economic. I remember the Budapest. A page from the author, that's what it says on the thing. I think this is I can't remember Budapest. A page from author's autographed copy of the indictment. Göring comment at the top of the page is the victor will always be judged and be vanquished the accused. Interesting. Oh, so that's part of it. Okay. The trial, 1945, 1946. The prosecution opened November 20th. The reading of the indictment. Morning session. The grim catalog of Nazi crime contained in the indictment was read in the record. Count 1. The common plan of conspiracy, the acquisition of totalitarian control in Germany, utilization of Nazi control for foreign aggression. Count 2. Crimes against peace, violation of international treaties, agreements, and assertion. In the prisoners' dock, the tension relaxed as they began to realize that the opening session consisted merely of the reading of the indictment, which they had already read. They sat silently with diminishing attention, some switching on the different translation on the earphone, others gazing around the courtroom to size up the judges, the prosecution, the reporters, and the audience. Lunch hour. There was a general letting off of steam as the defendants met and shook hands and talked for the first time since captivity, some for the first time in their lives. They ate lunch right in the courtroom room after it was cleared. They ate lunch buzzing with released tension about all sorts of things from power, politics to physical needs. Ribbentrop was arguing with Hess, but getting now nowhere, since Hess had no recollection of the world events recounted in the indictment. Ribbentrop then remarked to me, "Why all this fuss about breaking treaties? Did you ever read about the history of British Empire? Why it's full of broken treaties, oppression of minorities, mass murder, aggression, wars, and everything?" I asked him whether the crimes of the past history should be accepted pattern for international law. Well, no, but I thought that as long as the atomic bomb has made war too dangerous for nations to resort, they will settle the differences peacefully in the future anyhow. Here he has picked up his ears. Atomic bomb? What's that? The atom smashing bomb. Ribbentrop tried to explain. What does that mean? Ribbentrop launched into an explanation of the atomic bomb again and asked Hess whether he really couldn't remember any of these things they were talking about today. As I watched the others eat, several of them remarked that the food was getting better. I suppose we'll get steak the next day you hang us, Von Grin. Shrinch was sitting alone, still being snubbed by the others. As I passed him, he stood up to attract my attention. "You know, Hirdok," he said, trying to make smart talk, "I was sentenced in this very room once before." "Is that so? How many times have you been tried in your lifetime?" "Oh, 12 or 13 times. I've had lots of trials. That's old stuff. A few years now, the lawyers of the world will condemn this trial. You can't have a trial without law. Besides, it's really not nice to let Germans denounce Germans as they will at this trial. That will not make a very dignified impression, mark my words." The Kongloon signaled to me to the order, then back to their seat. As Von screeched past me, he said, "This is a bad day, not for you, but for us." Afternoon session, the reading of the indictment continued. Count 3, war crimes, murder, and ill treatment of civilian population, and prisoner of war, deportation for slave labor. Killing hostages, count 4, crimes against humanity, murder, extermination, enslavement, prosecution on political and racial grounds. Excuse me, sorry. The charges against the individual defendants and organizations were read after the charges under the 4 counts of the indictment had been completed. Ribbentrop suffered an attack of vertigo and Chinish had taken out of the courtroom. Later, Goring told me that he was now sure that Hess was crazy because he had said during the session, "You'll see the apparition will vanish and you will be fur of German within a month." November 21st. Prosecutor Jackson opening address. Morning session. The defendants all pled not guilty, some qualifying this with the additional phrase "in the sense of the indictment." Justin Jackson then began his opening speech for the prosecution. He described the party rise to power with the aid of its stormtroop, S.A. Ruffin, who terrorized and silenced Democratic opposition and were able to at length to combine with political opportunist military indirectly monarchists, and political reactionaries. 1 month after Hitler's accession to power, the Richtung fire was used as the pretext to get von Hindenburg to suspend the most vital guarantees of the war constitution and give Hitler dictatorial power. Within a few months, the labor unions were abolished and Robert Ley became the undisputed dictator of German labor. The Nazis put into effect their anti-Christian ideology by persecuting the various churches, especially the Catholic Church, in spite of concordat signed with the Holy See. Pastor Nesmond was thrown into a concentration camp as a means of squashing opposition from the Lutheran Church. Lunch hour. Nazi crimes against Christians was the main topic of conversation among the vendors during the lunch hour. Crimes against Christianity? Rosenberg remarked cynically, "Did you ever pay attention to the Russian crimes against Christianity?" I asked Ribbentrop whether his statement admitted knowledge and helplessness with respect to the Nazi persecution of the church was quoted. "Yet," he said, "I told them that its checks there were several protests from the Vatican, and Hitler finally ignored them. There was nothing you could do about it, but that was all right." Goring flared up in the middle of a mouthful. "We were a sovereign state, and that was strictly our business." Later, Goring was heard to say to Funk, "Don't worry, you are only taking orders from me. I'll take full responsibility for the 4-year plan." Funk grinned in sheepish gratitude. Wow. So now we are on page 40, page 430, and I'm so happy that we got to read another chapter together. And yeah, so, and I forgot to tell you at the beginning of my podcast that that I am from Hawaii, and yes, I have disabilities, and I forgot to say that, and I'm hard of hearing, and you know, I'm a little bit more, have to learn a little differently in life. I'm on the autistic spectrum, if you think, because some people don't think, some people do. So these are things that people can't comprehend or assume or don't. It's just really complicated for our generation. And so, as you can see, I do kind of, it's harder for me to read, but once I read it, it's like, okay, I'm understanding. And it's just, recollection of questions sometimes. It's like, but if I know the question, I'm like, oh yeah, now I remember this question. But it's just like that. But yeah, so thank you for being on another episode with me. Thank you for listening to this, and I hope you guys are enjoying it from if you're in the car, if you are watching it on YouTube. Thank you for following me. Don't forget to hit that like button on this podcast today. Don't forget to follow, get other people to subscribe to my channel, and we will see each other at the next Real Trash podcast. Mahalo and have a great day. Bye. See you later.